Hello and welcome to The World This Week with me, Anthony Baxter. A look at some of the biggest global news stories for an international city, brought to you by the London Live News team. Tonight, as the fight to save Ukraine from Russia continues, we'll look at the first week of the invasion and hear from those who've left everything behind to escape President Putin's war.
My husband, my home, my dog, my cats, my life.
Pressure grows on the West to do more as the UK government is urged to tackle Russian corruption and money on its doorstep. Well, as millions around the world unite in support for the Ukrainian people, we'll look at the efforts here to help and abroad. And a moving moment for Camilla as the Duchess of Cornwall meets London's Ukrainian community. All of that to come in our programme this evening, which is dedicated to the disaster unfolding in Ukraine. Well, at the time of recording, these were some of the latest lines from the conflict. World leaders have called an attack on Europe's largest nuclear plant reckless, horrific and unacceptable. Fighting broke out at the Zaporizhzhia plant in the early hours of yesterday, causing a fire. Several reactors were taken offline, but experts believe there's been no radiation leak. The site is now being controlled by Russia. The Home Secretary has travelled to Poland to meet Ukrainians trying to flee to the UK. Priti Patel launched a family scheme allowing Britons and those settled here to bring their relatives to join them. And fighting continues with several cities facing relentless shelling, including Mariupol in the south of the country, one of Russia's key targets. It's feared the bombardment has led to a huge loss of civilian life. Well, as the conflict continues to develop at rapid pace, with tomorrow being day 11, let's just take a moment to look back at the first week of the invasion of Ukraine. Tanya Francis reports.
Seven days into this bloody conflict, Russia intensified its bombardment of cities amid mounting casualties and streams of refugees pouring out of the country. In Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv, which has a population of 1.5 million people, another round of aerial attacks shatter buildings and light up the sky with balls of fire. The roof of the city's police building, the intelligence headquarters and a university among those targeted, according to officials, as well as blocks of flats. In the capital, Kyiv, the main TV tower was destroyed, killing 5 people, including a journalist, and the city's Holocaust memorial also came under fire. Despite the loss of life and the bombardment, what has emerged during this first week is that Moscow underestimated Ukraine's resistance and readiness to fight.
The operation began too late. That's Putin's personal mistake. The organization and moral readiness to fight of the Ukrainian military were underestimated. They turned out to be not bad at all. Russia failed to win total air superiority and control of the airspace over all of Ukraine. That's also a big minus for them.
A huge 40-mile-long column of Russian tanks and other military vehicles stood outside the capital, while they also pressed their assault on the strategic port cities of Kherson and Mariupol. Kherson becoming the first major city to fall to Russian forces on Thursday. At least 2,000 civilians have been killed since the start of the conflict. In a defiant statement, President Volodymyr Zelensky called on Ukrainians to keep up the resistance.
We are a people who in a week have destroyed the plans of the enemy, plans that were made for years, dishonourably, premeditatively, with hatred toward our country and our people, to all people who have two things, freedom and a heart. But we stop them. We are beating them off, our soldiers, our border guards, our territorial defence units.
On Wednesday, Russia reported its military casualties for the first time, saying nearly 500 of its troops had been killed and almost 1,600 wounded. The tallies led to anti-war sentiment spreading across the country, with thousands of people signing open letters and online petitions demanding to stop the invasion.
Tanya Francis there. Well, the West has been united in its support of Ukraine. Many countries imposing tougher and tougher sanctions on Moscow and individuals connected to President Putin. In Ukraine, many have called on NATO to impose a no-fly zone to protect them from Russian warplanes, but that would pit the Western alliance against Moscow. Boris Johnson explained more on the risks of doing this during a visit to see NATO forces on the Eastern Front in Estonia.
This afternoon, you're telling the crowd here, we as the international community have responsibility to do everything we can to help the Ukrainians in their efforts. So are you actually doing that if you are not granting the request from Ukraine for a no-fly zone?
Thank you. And I just want to get back to the points that Kaya and Jens and all of us have made today. It is very, very important to understand that NATO is a defensive alliance. This is a time when miscalculation and misunderstanding is all too possible, and it's therefore crucial that we get that message over. That does not mean that we cannot help our friends, or it does not mean that they do not have a right to self-defense, and we can help them in that self-defense, and that is what we are doing. But when it comes to a no-fly zone, which is I think what you asked, in the skies above Ukraine, we have to accept the reality that that involves shooting down Russian planes. As I said in an answer to, I think, the first question, that's a very, very big step. It is simply not on the agenda of any NATO country.
Well, whilst that may come as a disappointment to many in Ukraine, it is the belief of world leaders that avoiding a no-fly zone is essential in order to avoid escalating the crisis and triggering a potential worldwide conflict. Let's also hear from the American president. Joe Biden used his first State of the Union address to condemn the conflict.
6 days ago, Russia's Vladimir Putin sought to shake the very foundations of the free world, thinking he could make it bend to his menacing ways. But he badly miscalculated. He thought he could roll into Ukraine and the world would roll over. Instead, he met with a wall of strength he never anticipated or imagined. He met the Ukrainian people.
Whilst the Ukrainian people have fought fiercely to defend their country, many have also been forced to flee, triggering a huge humanitarian crisis, with more than 1 million refugees now having left, with fears as many as 4 million citizens could be displaced in the coming weeks. These people have made it to Romania, but their future and what will remain of their homes is unclear.
We're feeling a lot of pain, and pain, just pain, a lot of pain for my country and my people. We do not have words to explain this pain.
What did you leave behind?
My husband, my home, my dog, my cats, my life.
The horrors of war and what the Ukrainian people are facing has triggered a huge response from charities, individuals and authorities here in London. From Ukraine's flag flying from buildings in Twickenham to Downing Street, centres being overwhelmed with donations in Balham and protests in Westminster, and financial support to the organisations on the ground. Tens of thousands of pounds has been raised already by 2 campaigns launched by the Evening Standard and the Independent newspapers. David Cohen is their campaigns editor. He's been speaking to James Dickman.
We've all been so moved and upset by all the images coming out of Ukraine and on the borders to the west. So we've set up 2 appeals, the one on the Evening Standard and the one on the Independent. The Evening Standard appeal is called the Evening Standard Ukraine Appeal, and the Independent's appeal is the Refugees Welcome Appeal. And both of them are through GoFundMe, and we are basically raising money for the hundreds of thousands of men, women and children who are currently fleeing Ukraine to their neighbors or displaced within Ukraine. And we're going to be partnering with charities on the ground, like the Red Cross, that's the first one we've mentioned, who will be providing humanitarian aid in the form of food, water, clothing, shelter, and medical supplies.
We've all seen the harrowing pictures that are coming out of Ukraine daily, and they're getting worse. It seems like we can feel a bit helpless back here, but how much of a difference can this money give to the people of Ukraine fleeing, particularly if we all rally together?
Yes, I think that there is going to be this. So they're saying already 500,000 have fled across the border, and this could rise to well over 1 million. And people are arriving. A normal 2-hour journey is taking 18 hours on the train. And those are the lucky ones, because, you know, the others are having to walk 50, 60 kilometers to the border. So this will help relieve, these charities are all operating on the ground at the borders, and it will help relieve the incredible work that's already being done and provide the kind of support that they need.
David Cohen there speaking to James Dickman. Well, Russian people have also demonstrated against the violence, calling it Putin's war. Elena Sudakova is the director of Pushkin House in Bloomsbury, a Russian cultural centre. She's explained more on the difference between what Putin wants and what the Russian people would like to see.
We want to make it sort of crystal clear that we condemn Putin's invasion into Ukraine and that we wholeheartedly support Ukrainian people at this time. And we have made statements to this effect on all of our channels. This should not be happening on the 21st century. But we also do not want to divert the attention from the struggle of the Ukrainian people right now, because they are truly the victims here. However, we feel that it is important to distinguish between what Putin wants and what the Russian people and Russian organizations want. Unfortunately, the two are currently seen as synonymous in the West and in the world, but they are not. But also as an independent cultural center in the UK, specializing in Russian culture, we realize how lucky we are to have a free voice that we hope will allow us to relay the anti-war sentiment of other cultural institutions, artists, and voices which are currently repressed and censored across Russia.
The World This Week continues after the break. As Roman Abramovich confirms he's selling Chelsea, the Russian billionaire was the focus of this week's PMQs. We'll hear the claims against him and from the mayor, Sadiq Khan, as he met with Ukraine's ambassador to the UK. Hello, welcome back. You're watching The World This Week from the London Live News team. A special focus this week on the conflict in Ukraine. Let's start this part of the programme with more of the sanctions that have been brought in against Russia. The country's banks, high-profile individuals and airlines all facing restrictive measures by the UK, EU, US and other countries. Trade also being impacted with large brands boycotting the country. The measures around rich Russians living or operating in Britain also addressed during this week's PMQs, including a question from the Labour leader on the current Chelsea owner, Roman Abramovich, before he confirmed he was selling the club.
Mr. Speaker, Roman Abramovich is the owner of Chelsea Football Club and various other high-value assets in the United Kingdom. He's a person of interest to the Home Office because of his links to the Russian state and his public association with corrupt activity and practices. Last week, the Prime Minister said that Abramovich is facing sanctions. He later corrected the record to say that he isn't. Well, why on earth isn't he?
Mr. Speaker, it's not appropriate for me to comment on individual cases at this stage. But what I can say, and I stand, Mr. Speaker, by what I've said in the House and what we've put on the record. But be in no doubt that the actions that we've already taken, that this House has already taken, are having an effect in Moscow. And by exposing the ownership of properties of companies in the way that we are, by sanctioning 275 individuals, already a further 100 last week, the impact is being felt. And what we will publish in addition, Mr. Speaker, is a full list of all those associated with the Putin regime of course, we have already announced sanctions on Putin and Lavrov themselves. I can tell the House that they will have heard what the President of the United States had to say last night. The vice is tightening on the Putin regime, and it will continue to tighten.
Well, prior to that exchange, there was a very rare moment of applause in the Commons as the Ukraine ambassador watched on from the public gallery. The ambassador went on to have a meeting with the mayor in which Sadiq Khan emphasised London's solidarity with the people of Ukraine, but also his frustration at how the government had dealt with Russian money in London.
Well, I think the British government's been far too slow, and the British government needs to do much more, much quicker in relation to freezing the assets of Putin's chums, these Russian oligarchs who are close to Putin, who are using London and our country to launder some of this money, either through buying property. Transparency International estimate that £1.5 billion worth of property, UK properties tied up this way. In London alone, it's 1.1 billion. We know businesses are used as a vehicle to launder money. There's no point the government, at some stage in the future, publishing a list of overseas owners, or sometime in the future, complaining because these assets have been sold off. This delay is giving these Russian oligarchs close to Putin the time to sell their assets, and so we're going to lose it.
Sadiq Khan there. Well, elsewhere, there was a visit for the Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall to the Ukrainian Catholic Cathedral in central London this week. The royal couple met with members of the capital's Ukrainian community. Camilla visibly moved by the trip.
I must say, my wife and I have been deeply moved by everything we've heard today during our visit, and above all by the extraordinary bravery, generosity and fortitude of the Ukrainian community in the face of such truly terrible aggression.
The Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, who's faced sanctions himself, also gave an update to Western media outlets this week, in which he claimed the country was prepared for more negotiations with Ukraine to end the fighting. However, he insisted that operations to demilitarize its neighbour would continue.
We're ready for the talks. When President Zelensky asked for them, the President Putin instantly agreed, sent a delegation. Then the President Zelensky changed his mind. Probably the Americans told him that he would not in a hurry, and they said no, we would come. And they came, not on the day agreed, but in 24 hours. And we were waiting for them. The talks were held. Ukrainian colleagues have our negotiation position. They promised us to bring their negotiating position to this round of the talks. We're ready to keep talks going, but we will continue our operation because we can't afford to retain the infrastructure in Ukraine that threatens the security of the Russian Federation. And the demilitarization in this regard, the destruction of the infrastructure and weapons threatening us, will be completed. Even if we sign a peace agreement, this must include this point.
Well, that is all from the world this week. 7 days in which we've seen war in Europe dominate the headlines. We'll leave you this evening with pictures from around the world of those who've come out in solidarity with Ukraine, and to the sound of the country's national anthem played by students from the Royal Irish Academy of Music. Good night.
This fight in the Ukraine is everyone's business, is everyone's struggle, because we believe in this country, in freedom. Where someone is imprisoned somewhere else, then we are all imprisoned here. Where someone's freedom somewhere else is under threat, then our freedom is under threat here. We believe in the rule of law and democracy, and we stand with Ukrainian Australians.
A lot of my cousins joined the forces to protect the cities. A lot of my girlfriends who don't have kids actually joined the force as well, learn how to shoot, to protect the others, and it's just scary. Scary that I worry that if my parents or family doesn't answer, that something might happen and I couldn't talk to them. I actually received a few calls and messages from my friends overnight saying goodbye messages because they're worried that they might not wake up.
My father, he's in Sumy, and Sumy right now is bombing. It is city in Ukraine, and they are bombing.
Right now?
Right now, he's there. He hardly can walk. He cannot walk properly, and they're bombing.